Hey there. Welcome to Lead Fearlessly, Strategies of Confident Women Leaders, the podcast that will empower you to unleash your inner strength and embrace leadership with confidence. I'm your host, Katie Winchenbach, and I'm excited to have you join us as we dive into the experiences of extraordinary women who've shattered glass ceilings and redefined success on their own terms. Get ready to be motivated, challenged, and equipped with the tools and strategies to lead fearlessly in your own life and career. I am so excited to welcome Katie Jones to the podcast today. Katie is the CEO of Nimble Group, LLC, and she is an expert in empowering HR communities. Katie, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Let's just dive right in, and I'll have you give us a brief overview of your story and how you got to be the CEO of Nimble Group.
Sure. It's a fun story, one with twists and turns, and I think a lot of leaders have. It definitely wasn't a straight line to CEO. I started out in the world of marketing, and I actually got my degree in journalism. So I always had this fascination around human behavior and why people do the things that they do. I studied psychology a little bit. When I graduated college, I took my first big kid job, I guess, in the world of professional sports. I thought, what's a fun way to spend your 9 to 5? And found an organization where I got to attend baseball games almost every day and work with partners and sponsors of the organization, work with some of the athletes and talk about advertising and promotion for them. And it was a blast. It was a wonderful kind of stepping stone after college into, okay, what does the working world look like? But I'm still having fun while I do it. And as I often tell people in this journey, a lot of times fun jobs aren't necessarily sustainable jobs. And so as I progressed through that and the end of the season wrapped up and I thought about, okay, what happens next for me? I thought, it's probably time that I look at a job that gives me some benefits, a salary, all of those kind of boring things that you think about as a 20-year-old that you're not really jazzed about, but are more and more meaningful as you get older. And so my next role was a community outreach specialist for still in a fun industry in a musical theater company. And I similarly there worked with the talent. I worked with the actors and help them with promotions and interviews, and would get them on local news stories and different journalistic interviews with local papers. And one day a recruiter came to me and said, hey, you've been doing this kind of event promotion thing and you've been working with talent, the folks that are featured on stage. I have this opportunity where it's similar work. You'd be working with the talent and folks that are going on stage, but it's more on the corporate side of things. It's for conferences. And I was curious. I was intrigued and took the conversation and learned that there was this organization producing conferences for HR professionals local to me. And up until that point, HR didn't mean a whole lot to my young self. As you can imagine, in the entertainment world, the sports world, HR is just kind of that girl in the back that runs payroll or where you go when you have a complaint to file. So as I got into this business and started integrating myself into the HR world and these conferences, I started hearing about all the other things that HR has their hands in an organization. And it's all kinds of things like company culture, those benefits that I wasn't very excited about, and the performance reviews and leadership styles. And it was all of these things that make how you show up to the office and how that office is presented to you, how builds the culture that's there and is really, really important. And I had always had this fascination with work. I was raised by a single mother who worked very, very hard, and I saw her climb the corporate ladder. And went to the office with her on take your child to work day, or even if she was juggling childcare, and had this kind of mysticism around the corporate world and what work looked like and what that meant to take you away from your families for 40 hours a week, and why folks would structure their whole lives around a job or a career. And so as I saw these events where people were talking about this and making those 40 hours a week meaningful and making them a place where people felt engaged and like they were doing fulfilling work, I just became a sponge. I was completely obsessed with the work and dove in headfirst. And so I started as that speaker manager role where I was working with the keynoters on stage and making sure that they had all that they needed to be successful. And I quickly got my hands into as many parts of the business as I could. I put on my marketing hat and worked a little bit with the creative side of things and creating graphics and email campaigns. And then COVID hit 2020. And I think that is where a lot of people's career stories may diverge, like mine. So as you can imagine, in the events business, we couldn't produce events in quite the same way that we did before there was a global pandemic. And we had about 6 weeks to transform what was our largest flagship event from a in-person event to a virtual event. And the leader of the organization at the time, a gentleman named Bud Bernstein, trusted me when I came to him with a solution to say, here's a platform we can use. I think we can get buy-in from our attendees. We can get buy-in from our sponsors. We can teach the speakers how to use this technology, and we can still have this conference. It'll look a little different, but we can still make it happen at what I think is a very important time for HR professionals when they're all juggling how do they handle this global pandemic within their organizations. And he said, okay, if you have a plan, there's not much else we can do beyond cancel the event entirely. So let's do it. And I'm very, very grateful for his trust at that time. We ultimately put on 3 or 4 successful virtual events over the first couple of years of the pandemic. And when it came time that we were actually allowed back in buildings and able to gather together, showing our vaccine cards and wearing masks, but still under the same roof, he said, I think I'm ready to retire. I think it's time for me to take the next step in my career. And how would you like to take over as CEO and leader of this business? And I was very, very humbled by that ask, but gracious, very enthusiastically accepted.
I think it's so amazing how organically that happened. And I think that's really a testament to how you showed up at work and really showed the value that you're bringing. What are some tips you would have for how young women can really make sure that they're showing their bosses and their colleagues that value that they're bringing to the table?
That's a really great question. And I was just having a conversation around this the other day. When I was in high school, I took a class that was kind of how to have a job. It taught us about how to interview and how to create a resume and all of those really great skills that aren't usually taught in a K through 12 setting. So I was very lucky to have that experience. But one of the biggest things I took away from that course was my teacher told me whenever she talks to managers, whenever she talks to employers, the number one thing they're looking for out of their employees is initiative. And that word just became tattooed on my brain, the initiative. Someone who's willing to raise their hand, someone who is willing to see there's work that needs to be done or a problem to be solved and is willing to say, I have a solution or I have an idea, or to even ask, why do we do things this way, to get a better understanding of the business and how it operates. And so in any role I've had, I've looked beyond just what my job description was, but to try to understand other pieces of the business. And I think that's really informed how other opportunities have opened to me, and I've been able to step into new steps of my career.
Let's talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. I think it's common for women to face And even when you're at this point in your career where you have the CEO title, it's not that that magically goes away. So tell me a little bit about how you've kind of built confidence and pushed that imposter syndrome to the side as much as you can.
Sure. So it's imposter syndrome is something that's so insidious, right? It doesn't matter what title we have or where we are in life. I think it still shows up to varying degrees throughout folks' career, mine definitely included. And there's kind of two things I want to say about imposter syndrome. So the first is I'm based in Maine, and we are one of the oldest demographically, oldest states in the country. And being a young professional in the business world of Maine is challenging in ways that I didn't expect. And I remember being more junior in my career and going into meetings, going into networking events, and feeling like I didn't belong because I was young. And I would think, okay, once I get married and I can say my husband instead of my boyfriend, I'll feel more established. Or once I own a house, and I'm not saying the apartment that I rent, or once I have this title, I will feel like I have achieved a milestone where I feel like I finally belong in these conversations or these settings. And each time I checked off one of those milestones, I realized that feeling was still there, that imposter syndrome was still there, that there was still something I was missing. And I had the light bulb moment that there's nothing on paper that's ever going to tell me I'm enough, that it's something that I just have to intrinsically believe and show up as my authentic self as I am, not waiting for the next step or the next milestone. So that was one piece of it. And then a second was I met a really brilliant woman, Carla Harris, who does keynote engagements and worked for some really large companies in the past. And she talked about her own experience with imposter syndrome and shared the advice that you are never invited into a room by accident. You're not given a seat at the table by accident. No one made a mistake in inviting you somewhere. And if they had, maybe they should have done a better job of keeping you out if they didn't intend for you to be there. But when that happens, when you are invited to that seat at the table, at that meeting, in that conversation, someone has you there on purpose. And it is then your responsibility to show up, to give your perspective, to lend your expertise, to bring the value that you have to that situation. And that is something I have carried with me in any situation where I've come into a role, an event, a conversation where I felt maybe I wasn't qualified, is to remember that I'm not there on accident. This wasn't a mistake, and that I do have something to contribute.
Okay, two things from that. First, I love that advice. I think that is incredible. Second, I think it's so funny that you brought up kind of the checkpoints of like when I can say my husband instead of my boyfriend, or when I could say my house instead of my apartment, because I did the exact same thing. Like I felt exactly the same way. I'd be in these rooms, and all these people would be talking about the vacations they were taking or the things they were doing with their spouse. And I was over here in like this 300 square foot apartment with my boyfriend, my cat, feeling so out of place. And it's funny how those things just kind of tie into how we feel about ourselves. And I love too that you learned the same lesson that I did, which is that's not bringing you value. It's really, you have to bring that confidence.
Absolutely. And what's something a little unique about my journey is in the same year that I became CEO and bought my business, I also became a mother for the first time. So I was checking two of those milestone boxes within just months of each other. I became a CEO and a mom. And I remember thinking I couldn't have any expectations of how either of those roles would go for me, CEO or mother, because I was so brand new to them, and at the same time and feeling overwhelmed. And there's a lot of uncertainty that happens with both of those transitions, and to pile them on top of each other, it's exponential. And I think that having those experiences at the same time is something that helped me eventually come into the mindset that there's no one that's going to tell you you're ready. You just have the opportunity and you move into it and you do it scared and you figure it out. And I ultimately have a kid that is 2.5 now, and she's alive and thriving and doing wonderfully. And I have a business that's 2.5 now, and we're sustaining and keeping folks employed and still doing good work in the community. And if I had not taken either of those steps because I didn't feel qualified, my life would look very different than it does right now.
I think that's really important that you highlighted, that you took the steps even though you didn't feel qualified, because I think a lot of times for women, whether it's a promotion or switching jobs, we're trying to wait until we check every single one of the boxes instead of realizing that there's room to grow and learn on the job, which is obviously what you did, and you did very well.
Well, thank you. You're very kind to say that. It similarly with that parenthood journey, I remember having the conversation with my husband of, we're never going to feel like we're completely ready to be parents. There's never the right time that someone says, yep, now's the time. You have all of the right amount of money in your bank account. You're living in the right house. You have the perfect job. Everything is buttoned up to a T, and now's the time to do it. And I think we need to transfer that kind of that confidence that we can leap and figure it out that we often have in our personal lives into our professional lives as well. And I think it's really important that you bring up how women in particular kind of wait to check all of those boxes before they step into a role. There's tons of research around women won't apply for jobs until they check off, I think it's 80% or more of the qualifications on a job listing. And for men, it's something like 50%. It's much lower. And so we need to understand that there is that room to grow, and professional development is something that is ongoing. It's not something that you hit a certain level and suddenly the world opens to you.
That's so important to remember. And what are some resources that have been really helpful for you, Katie, as you've been going on this professional journey and continuing your personal and professional development?
That's a great question. So I am, it may not appear this way from my title or the work that I do, but I am very much an introvert. I love to be at home. I get my energy from recuperating in a quiet space. That said, my career puts me in a lot of very public spaces. I'm producing conferences with hundreds of people around me, and I'm going to association meetings and networking events and trainings where I am in a lot of very social settings. And I've found that although being at home is my comfort place, the resources and wisdom and knowledge that I get from being in rooms with other people and being in community from those associations, from those conferences, is invaluable. And even though it may not be the place that I feel my most comfortable, it is the place where I'm doing a lot of growing. So the resources that I found have shown up differently throughout my career. Those are definitely one of them, of getting around a table with some other folks and saying, what challenges are you facing? Oh, me too. Can we talk about this over coffee? And developing a really strong network. When I am in more of a introverted or quieter chapter of life, there are books. I turn to books very often. I do a lot of reading around business books, professional development books. I love I think we've rebranded them these days, but a self-help book are fantastic. And then the other resource that I'll mention, because I think it's very, very important, is therapy and counseling. I believe that as a leader, self-awareness is one of the most important skills we can have. And on and off throughout my life, I have engaged in talk therapy. And at times it's been because I was going through something challenging, but other times it was simply just a check-in on my mental health. We have a physical every year to make sure that our bodies are functioning well. I think we should have a check-in with a mental health professional at some point too, to say, hey, is everything going all right upstairs? And I have found that to be an invaluable tool as I've navigated my career.
I think that's really important to note that this isn't something that you do alone, whether it's finding someone who has had a similar experience and saying, hey, can we get a cup of coffee and talk about it, or finding a therapist that you can talk to and check in with. It's really just so important as we're rising through our careers to have that network.
Definitely. And I've framed it a few different ways over the years. One of my favorite ways to think about that network is as your personal board of directors. So I have somebody that I turn to when I have a real estate question. I have somebody that I turn to when I have a employment law issue. I have somebody that I turn to that can help me with accounting and finances. And to have those experts that are close, trusted advisors, not necessarily on a business level, but a personal level too. And to feel like you have those folks in your corner that may be more expert on things than you are, that are really going to have your back and steer you in the right direction.
And let's talk a little bit about balance and boundaries. You are doing so much. I mean, becoming a CEO and becoming a mom in the same year, those are two huge undertakings. How have you been able to balance the two of those?
So that's also a really wonderful question. And I think that word balance has a lot of weight with it, right? We think about how things need to be in perfect balance. I'm a Libra. We're represented by the scales, all things balanced. But I like to think of it more of a work-life integration. And I understand that there are times in my life, in my business, that will demand more from me. And there are times where it will demand a little less from me, and understanding that there are ebbs and flows to that, and finding ways for my personal life, my family, my social life, my friends to exist in harmony with work. And I had to get very, very clear about what I wanted out of being an entrepreneur and CEO when I first took on the business, and was asked at one point, is this a growth company? Do you want to acquire a bunch of events and grow and become a large corporation that's employing hundreds of people? Or is this a lifestyle company? Is this something that you're passionate about? And if it stays the same size that it is, you'll be happy as long as the bills are paid and you're doing good work and employing some wonderful people. And I did a lot of soul searching around that question, and ultimately came to, I think, the latter. I don't intend to take over the world. I don't need to be a Fortune 500 company, but I do want to have great impact in my community. And in order for me to do that, I need to take care of myself outside of work as well. So one of my favorite things that I was able to implement once I became CEO was we do operate with a 4-day work week. And we work Monday to Thursday, and then Fridays are up to my employees to decide how they'd like to use, especially as an event business. There are busy times and there are less busy times. And if you need to work on Friday because there's a lot going on, I trust that you're going to do that. You're a grown up and you understand that you need to take care of certain responsibilities. But if you have that downtime, please take it. Please go spend time with your loved ones and recharge yourself and fill your cup, because that's the best way I can think of taking care of a person to then show up and do their best work Monday to Thursday.
I think it speaks volumes about your leadership style that you're able to really recognize what your team is bringing to the table and say, I've hired great people. I trust you to get the job done, and I trust you to take care of yourself when you need to. And I think that's a really powerful environment to create.
Yeah. So thank you for saying that. And I have really wonderful people on my team, and I try to be very other focused in my leadership in both my internal team and how we show up to our clients. like I said, I'm an introvert. I'm not comfortable being the loudest person in the room. I definitely don't consider myself the smartest person in any room. And I think the best thing I can do as that leader is elevate the people around me and make sure that they have the situation, the tools, the circumstances to show up in their best way. I think it also kind of speaks to my history as an event professional. My philosophy is if we're hosting a good event, if I'm running a great event, you don't even know that my team exists. We're behind the scenes. Everything's running seamlessly. And so it's very easy for me as a leader to step into the background and let other people shine.
One thing that you said earlier that I want to highlight is thinking about when you stepped into the role of CEO and how you wanted to run the company. And did you want it to be focused on growth or did you want it to be focused on lifestyle? And I think that is so important that you really took a step back and did some soul searching, because I feel like often as women, we are really focused on climbing that ladder, on the next thing, the bigger, the better, and not as much focused on what does success actually mean for us and how do we want to define success. And I think that's something you did in that moment, is think about like, what is success for you and what does that look like in the coming years?
Absolutely. It's funny you bring that up. I around that time went on a retreat, a women's leadership retreat, and they asked us just that question: what does success look like for you? And spent most of that retreat doing work that helped inform that answer and help us come to our ultimate conclusion there. And I decided that success to me meant having ownership of my time. And I make almost every decision in both my personal and professional life with that compass of success to me is having ownership of my time. And that means paying that forward to my employees, to other folks as well, that I'm not requiring anyone to show up in a certain way at certain times, that folks know what works best for them. I think it was also a big part of the decision when I had the opportunity to step into the CEO and owner role of, okay, I'm planning to become a mother this year, and I have the opportunity to either take control of what my career looks like and become a CEO and decide what that looks like, or I can say, this isn't the time for me. I'm going to focus on being a mother, but I will be at the whim or mercy of being employed by somebody else and what their maternity policy looks like and what my relationship with my manager looks like. And I ultimately decided for me, I would rather have the control, and that might mean a challenging few years, a challenging first year especially, but that it was something that I would have power over, and that fit into my definition of success.
And what was that like, especially as a younger woman stepping into that leadership role and having, control over a company that seems like something that could be really intimidating?
It was intimidating. I will be very candid there. I very specifically remember being in a group that had supported our conferences, our events for many, many years. And the leader of that group saying to me two things. First, they said to me, I don't know that anyone really knows who you are, which was just a gut punch when you've taken over an organization. And then about a year later, that same woman said to me, wow, you have done tremendous things with this. There were a lot of skeptics when you stepped into this role. And I took both of those moments. I won't lie, they both stung on the face. I didn't love hearing either of those, but to then say, okay, why did this sting? And is there an opportunity for growth here? So when I heard, well, I don't know that people really know who you are, I realized, you know what? I do need to step into the forefront a little more. I can't always be in the background, that I do need to put myself out there in the community. And to hear that there were a lot of skeptics around me stepping into the role, it was one of those things that kind of affirmed the imposter syndrome that I had. And that happens sometimes. There may be doubts you have about yourself, and then something in the universe goes, oh, well, that was true. And to realize that things can be true, but there is also room to grow. And so I look at those times where something was challenging or I had a difficult conversation and try to find the opportunity for growth there after I lick my wounds a little bit and let myself feel a little bit sorry, to pick myself up and say, okay, that hurt. For what reason and what can I do about it?
And that, I think, is such a great mindset to have, because I think it's easy to let that get to you, let that imposter syndrome really kind of kick in and feel like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm not right for this. I'm not ready for this. And I'm just going to go wallow and lick my wounds for a very long time. But I love that you were like, you know what? I'm going to give myself that time. And then I'm going to bounce back and I'm going to do what I need to do to prove them wrong.
Yeah. And calling back to working with a therapist, I remember after we were heading into the first virtual event that we produced, and I was terrified because we had a track record of very successful events, and to do something brand new for the first time, you have no idea how it's going to turn out. And I remember her saying to me that very little in life is 100% good or 100% bad, and that most things are somewhere in the middle, and that nothing is going to be a perfect success or a perfect failure. And we have to look at where it does land on that spectrum, take what worked for us, and then learn from the experience and continue to grow.
And looking back, now that, you know, you're kind of settled into this role, you reached that CEO chair, what is one leadership lesson or piece of advice you wish you could give to your younger self?
Oh, I think there's a lot I would want to tell my younger self, first of all, but maybe it's top of mind because we're talking about this no perfection or total failure. But I think in line with that, I would want to tell my younger self, don't believe your own hype, but also don't believe your haters. I think when you have leadership or a person coming to you saying you're doing a fantastic job and we want to see you continue to grow and develop and excel and you're brilliant, and showering you with all of these compliments, it's very easy to get an ego. At the same time, when you do get that tough feedback or that criticism, it's very easy to fall into that place of wallowing or take it very, very personally as a personal attack. And so I often give that mantra to myself these days, but I definitely could have used it in my younger years as well. Don't believe your own hype and don't believe the haters.
That is great advice. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You can find Katie's LinkedIn in the show notes to stay up to date on everything she's doing with the Nimble Group. Thanks for tuning in to Lead Fearlessly, Strategies of Confident Women Leaders. If you've been inspired by today's episode, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a friend who could use a confidence boost. Remember to subscribe so you won't miss out when we drop our next season. And if you found our conversations valuable, please leave us a 5-star review. Your support helps us continue to amplify the voices of incredible women leaders and inspire more fearless female trailblazers. We'll see you next time.